What could have shattered the seemingly perfect lives of Helen and Maynard Fine, a beloved couple in the quiet town of Maryville, Tennessee, on a tragic night in May 1977? How did this well-respected family, known for their strong values and close-knit bond, become the center of a mystery? Helen and Maynard Fine were a married couple who resided in the quiet town of Maryville, Tennessee. Together, they had a son named Michael Keith Fine. The Fines were well regarded in their community, known for their strong family values and the positive contributions they made to society. Despite their seemingly idyllic life, the Fines' world was shattered on May 20th, 1977. The peaceful life of the Fine family came to a tragic end when Helen and Maynard Fine were discovered lifeless in their home on Everett Avenue in Maryville. Their bodies were found by a maintenance worker who had come to check on their home after noticing that their phone lines had been disconnected for several days. Upon arriving at the scene, the worker spotted Helen Fine's lifeless body inside her car, prompting him to immediately call the authorities. When the police arrived, they made the further grim discovery of Maynard Fine's body inside the home. Autopsy results revealed that both Helen and Maynard had lost their lives from multiple gunshot wounds. The fact that the couple had been deceased for more than a week before they were found only added to the horror of the situation. Despite the police's efforts to gather evidence and investigate leads, the case quickly became one of the most perplexing mysteries in the area. There were no signs of forced entry, no immediate suspects, and no clear motive for the slayings. With little evidence to go on, the investigation stalled, and despite exhaustive efforts by local law enforcement, they were unable to piece together what had happened that fateful night. Leads dried up, and potential suspects were ruled out, leaving the case to grow cold. The lack of answers gave rise to speculation, with many forming their own theories about what might have happened. Some believed it was a crime of passion, while others speculated about a possible robbery gone wrong. For nearly 5 decades, the mystery of who took the lives of Helen and Maynard Fine remained unsolved. In May 2021, the case took a new turn when a family member contacted authorities, inquiring about any updates on the long unsolved case. The call prompted investigators to revisit the case, and it was officially reopened. Advances in forensic technology and investigative techniques gave the detectives renewed hope that they might finally solve the mystery of who ended the lives of Helen and Maynard. With the availability of more sophisticated tools, investigators combed through old evidence that had been sitting in storage for decades, including forensic evidence and witness statements. During the reinvestigation, detectives connected the Fine's son, Michael Keith Fine, to the weapon used in the slayings. The weapon had been recovered by police in 1978 at a local landfill. At the time, there was not enough evidence to link it conclusively to the case. But modern forensic analysis provided the breakthrough investigators had been waiting for. In November 2023, nearly 5 decades after the crime, Michael Fine was arrested and indicted for the criminal slaying of his parents. At the time of the slaying, Michael was 34 years old and, like his parents, had been well regarded in the community. 80-year-old Michael Fine is currently awaiting extradition to Tennessee to face trial. As the case moves toward trial, the long-standing mystery surrounding the Fine's demises appears to be inching closer to resolution. The authorities said they are also trying to find a woman, then a teen, who lived with the victims that they have not been able to identify and who is not considered a suspect but may have evidence related to the case. Maryville Police Chief Tony Crisp said that he spoke with the victims' families who expressed gratitude for the closure given up to this point in the investigation and thanked law enforcement for their efforts. What happens when the ordinary task of walking home from work turns into a chilling mystery that perplexes a community for over 5 decades? Karen Bentz, an 18-year-old from Akron, Ohio, was a devoted daughter juggling 2 jobs to support her family. On April 28, 1970, her life was cut tragically short when she vanished without a trace. This horrifying crime was not an isolated incident. Loretta Jean Davis, a 20-year-old from Brimfield Township, Ohio, met a similarly grim fate on September 27, 1975. How did these 2 seemingly unrelated slayings remain unsolved for so long? Karen Bentz was an 18-year-old resident of Akron, Ohio, described by her parents as a caring and adorable daughter. She lived a typical life for someone her age, working 2 jobs to support herself and her family. Karen spent her days employed at Lawson's and Red Barn, 2 local businesses located across from Akron City Hospital. However, on April 28, 1970, Karen's life took an unexpected turn. That day, Karen went to her parents' house to pick up her plain white work uniforms, a girdle, and penny loafers, preparing for her shift. After gathering her things, she left her parents' home to walk the 4 blocks back to her apartment. It was a short walk she had made many times before, but this time, something went horribly wrong. The next morning, her body was found just off Indian Hills Road in Tallmadge, nearly 6 miles away from her Akron apartment. Karen had been brutally stabbed 7 or 8 times in the chest. Her body was discovered face down, fully clothed, in a remote area. The investigation revealed that she had been lifeless for several hours by the time she was found. Despite the violent nature of her demise, there were no signs of assault. Her belongings were scattered near the crime scene. Police located her girdle, stockings, loafers, and one of her dresses less than a mile from her body. Another white uniform was found 2 miles away at the Southeast Avenue exit of the expressway. As investigators pieced together the evidence, they were left with more questions than answers. How had Karen ended up so far from her home, and why? Who could have committed such a horrific crime against a young woman with no known enemies? Despite the clues left behind, the investigation hit an end. No witnesses came forward, and no viable suspects emerged in the early stages of the case. The scattered belongings, the violent attack, and the mystery surrounding her final hours left police baffled. With no clear motive and little to go on, the case quickly grew cold. Karen's family was left devastated, as they were forced to endure the pain of losing their daughter without knowing why or who was responsible. This tragic case is eerily similar to that of Loretta Jean Davis, a 20-year-old woman from Brimfield Township, Ohio. She worked alongside her mother, who ran a small data processing business from their home. On the night of September 27, 1975, Loretta's life took a fatal turn. After midnight, she left her parents' home, leaving a note saying she was going to get something to eat, though she did not mention where she was headed. The following day, just before noon, a passerby discovered Loretta's body along Congress Lake Road in Suffield Township, about 1.5 miles from Waterloo Road. She had been brutally stabbed twice in the chest, and the scene painted a chilling picture of her final moments. Investigators were left scrambling to understand how she ended up there and why someone would want to harm her. Loretta's case sent shockwaves through the local community, just as Karen's demise had done 5 years earlier. Loretta's car, a Plymouth Duster, was found abandoned in front of Tallmadge Auto Parts at 51 Southeast Avenue in Tallmadge, the same town where Karen Bentz's body had been discovered. Witnesses reported seeing Loretta sitting in a silver 1975 Chrysler Cordoba with an unknown man around 2:30 a.m., just hours before her body was found. This lead initially seemed promising, but despite efforts to track down the man and the vehicle, the trail went cold. The haunting similarities between Loretta and Karen case were impossible to ignore. Both young women were stabbed to their end in or near Tallmadge, and both cases left investigators grasping for clues. Despite intensive investigations, both cases remained unsolved, their files slowly gathering dust as years passed without any breakthrough. After decades of investigation, a breakthrough finally came in September 2019. 75-year-old Gustav Safaris, a resident of Jackson Township, was arrested and charged with the slayings of Karen Bent and Loretta Davis. Authorities had long suspected a connection between the 2 cases, and after re-examining the evidence, they developed new leads that tied the cases together. Safaris's arrest brought a glimmer of hope to the families, who had waited more than 50 years for answers. Safaris was indicted on 8 charges, including kidnapping, attempted assault, and slaying, in connection with the brutal demises of Karen and Loretta. His criminal acts, which had haunted Akron for decades, were finally brought to light. The reinvestigation and modern forensic techniques played a key role in building a solid case against him, allowing authorities to pursue justice for the victims whose lives he had so cruelly taken. In April 2023, Safaris was sentenced by Judge Allison Breaux to 15 years to life in prison for the slaying of Karen Bentz and sentenced to life in prison without parole for the aggravated slaying of Loretta Davis. The conviction was a long-awaited victory for the families of Karen and Loretta, who had lived for decades with the grief of losing their loved ones without knowing who was responsible. Safaris's sentencing to life in prison ensures that he will never harm another person, offering a glimmer of solace to those who had waited for the truth. Breaux noted that both of the sentences will be run consecutively. She said, "When we consider consecutive sentencing, we consider the harm that has been caused. There is no greater harm in this lifetime than taking the lives of those two women with no regard to who they were. They were daughters, sisters, mothers, friends, and aunts. To viciously attack them and slay them in such a heinous way, and then to dump their bodies, consecutive sentencing is by far more appropriate than a concurrent sentence at this time." During the sentencing, Karen Bentz's sister appeared virtually to give a statement. Sandra Utterback said, "It has been 53 years this month since this monster stabbed her to her end and left her outside like garbage. I wish my parents and siblings were still living to witness this. Although I am glad he finally has to pay for this, it will never bring my sister back. His actions impacted my whole family." She closed her statement by saying, "To you, Gustav Safaris, you destroyed my family when you took the life of my sister, and you will finally be held accountable for your actions. I can never get my sister back no matter what sentence you receive, but at least you will not be able to destroy any more families. God forgive me, but I hope you burn in hell." How did Herman Brown, a young man with a promising future, meet such a violent and tragic end in his Cincinnati, Ohio apartment in 2003? What dark forces were at play on that fateful day? And why did it take 2 decades for the truth to surface? And how did the groundbreaking advances in forensic technology finally bring justice to a case that had long gone cold? Herman Brown was a young man with a future full of promise, living a life that held the potential for great things. However, everything came crashing down on February 15, 2003. On that day, police were called to the 2500 block of Sarvis Court after a concerned 911 caller reported an unusual and strong odor coming from Herman's apartment. When officers arrived at the scene and entered the apartment, they were confronted with a sight that could only be described as gruesome. Herman's body lay naked on the floor, his life clearly having been cut short in the most violent way imaginable. An extension cord was wrapped tightly around his neck, a horrifying indication of strangulation. His body also bore multiple stab wounds, evidence of a brutal and relentless attack. The brutality of the scene was undeniable, and investigators immediately knew they were dealing with something far beyond a routine demise investigation. Further inspection of the apartment revealed more disturbing details that added to the mystery. In the bathroom, investigators found blood in the sink, a possible indication that the perpetrator may have washed up after the slaying, or that Herman had fought for his life in those final moments, leaving behind traces of his struggle. Investigators recovered 6 cigarette butts scattered throughout the apartment, each one a potential link to the suspect. In addition, a DNA swab was taken from the victim's body, which would be crucial in determining whether there had been any form of assault involved in the crime. The blood from the sink was also carefully collected, as it could provide insight into what happened during the fatal moments leading up to Herman's demise. Despite the grim nature of the evidence, investigators remained determined to find the person responsible for taking the life of Herman. As investigators continued to analyze the evidence collected from the crime scene, a critical breakthrough came from the blood found in the bathroom sink. 2 distinct DNA profiles were identified within the blood, one belonging to Herman and the other to an unknown individual. Despite the discovery of this second DNA profile, it did not match anyone in the system, and without further leads, the investigation stalled. For years, the unknown DNA profile remained a haunting mystery. But this would all change, as 20 years later, the case would be reignited by the introduction of new forensic techniques. In 2023, nearly 2 decades after Herman Brown's life was taken, investigators revisited the cold case with the help of advancements in forensic technology. The DNA profile from the cigarette butts was re-extracted and subjected to a forensic genetic genealogy search. The search returned a match: Robert Stewart, a name that had not previously appeared in the investigation. Stewart, a resident of Lima, Ohio, became a prime suspect in the decades-old case. On September 15, 2023, Stewart was arrested, marking a significant development in the cold case. The arrest brought renewed hope for justice, as Stewart was charged with 2 counts of slaying and 1 count of felonious assault. If convicted, Stewart faces a maximum life sentence in prison for the brutal slaying of Herman Brown. The arrest and pending trial of Robert Stewart marked the beginning of the final chapter in a tragic case that had gone unsolved for far too long. How does a vibrant, community-driven young woman meet such a violent and untimely end in the heart of a bustling city? Susan Marcia Rose was just 24 years old when her life was brutally cut short in 1979. Known for her kindness and active involvement in local activities, Susie was a familiar face in her neighborhood, making her demise all the more shocking. Susie Rose was a 24-year-old woman living in Boston, Massachusetts in 1979. On October 30th, 1979, Susie visited a popular skating rink in Boston, a place she frequented and enjoyed. The rink was a hub for social interaction, and Susie was known to be a familiar face there, often seen with a smile and greeting everyone she met. It was an ordinary evening, filled with the usual laughter and excitement that characterize such outings. Tragically, this seemingly normal evening took a dark turn. Susie, known for her red hair, was found lifeless at 285 Beacon Street. The crime scene presented a grim picture. Susie had sustained multiple blunt injuries to her head, which resulted in fractures of the skull and lacerations of the brain. As the investigation into Susie's case began, authorities were faced with the challenging task of piecing together the evidence. Almost 2 years later, in June 1981, a man was put on trial. Despite the gravity of the evidence, the court found him not guilty. The acquittal marked a significant setback in the quest for justice for Susie, leaving her case unresolved and the perpetrator still at large. After nearly 44 years of unanswered questions and enduring mystery, a significant breakthrough emerged in August 2023. John Michael Ermer, a 69-year-old man from Oregon, took an extraordinary step by walking into the Portland FBI field office to confess a long-buried secret. Ermer's revelation was both unexpected and shocking. He claimed to have encountered a woman with red hair at a skating rink in Boston around Halloween in 1979. This description closely matched Susie Rose. Ermer provided a detailed account of the events leading up to the slaying. He described how, after meeting the woman, they both entered 285 Beacon Street, a building undergoing renovations at the time. According to Ermer, he seized a hammer from the site and, in a sudden and brutal act of violence, struck the woman on the head, causing fatal injuries. He further detailed that, after committing the crime, he fled to New York the following day. The confession prompted a renewed and rigorous investigation into the cold case. Law enforcement officials acted swiftly, obtaining a DNA sample from Ermer for comparison with evidence collected from the crime scene. The meticulous process of matching Ermer's DNA with the samples preserved from the scene confirmed his involvement. This genetic evidence unequivocally linked Ermer to the crime, validating his confession and providing critical confirmation of his guilt. How does a lively 13-year-old boy, full of life and love for his family, suddenly disappear, only for his body to be found days later in a shallow grave? The small town of Terra Alta, West Virginia, was forever changed when Jeremiah Jerry Watkins vanished in 1985. Jeremiah Matthew Watkins, often called Jerry, was a vibrant 13-year-old boy with a zest for life that radiated through his brown eyes. Living in the rolling hills of West Virginia, Jerry was known for his love of Kit Kat chocolates and his adventurous spirit. Despite his young age, Jerry carried a deep sense of responsibility and affection for his family, particularly his infant sister, Jamie Cole. But in November 1985, Jerry was reported missing. The local authorities, along with volunteers from the community, launched an extensive search operation. Despite their best efforts, the search for Jerry yielded no immediate leads, and the growing uncertainty began to weigh heavily on his family and friends. Jerry's tragic fate was confirmed on November 12, 1985, when his body was discovered by searchers in a shallow hole near railroad tracks in Terra Alta. The discovery was made by a group of local volunteers who had joined the search efforts, their hope for a safe return of Jerry dashed by the grim reality they unearthed. The autopsy conducted on Jerry's body revealed the full extent of the brutality he endured. The medical examiner determined that Jerry had suffered a severe brain bleed from a blow to the head, with the ultimate cause of demise being a stab wound to his back. Despite the immediate and ongoing efforts of local law enforcement and multiple investigative agencies, Jerry's case went cold. His sister Jamie, who had been just an infant when her brother disappeared, grew up with the heavy burden of his memory. His mother, Enid Nicola, was particularly devastated by the lack of progress in the investigation. The frustration and anger she felt over the unsolved case were compounded by the profound grief of losing her son. For nearly 40 years, the case of Jerry remained one of the many unresolved mysteries that haunted Terra Alta. Early February 2023, Captain T.N. Ticknell reopened the investigation into the case and quickly identified several inconsistencies in the statements made by David Monroe Adams, a 56-year-old resident of Westover. Adams, who was 18 at the time of Jerry's disappearance in 1985, had been interviewed multiple times as part of the renewed investigation. The discrepancies in his accounts led Ticknell to scrutinize the case more closely, revealing a pattern that suggested deception. During a series of intensive interviews, Adams eventually confessed to the crime, providing a detailed and unsettling narrative of the events leading to Jerry's demise. According to Adams, the fatal encounter began with a heated argument over a stolen bicycle at his residence in Terra Alta. The argument escalated rapidly, and in a moment of uncontrollable rage, Adams struck the 13-year-old Jerry in the face. The confrontation did not end there. Adams admitted to forcibly taking Jerry to a nearby shed where he fatally stabbed the young boy. In his confession, Adams revealed the disturbing details of how he then dragged Jerry's lifeless body to a shallow hole near the railroad tracks, the site that had been the location where Jerry's body was discovered by searchers just days after he went missing in 1985. The specifics of Adams's confession matched the physical evidence gathered at the scene. This validated long-held suspicions and brought a crucial resolution to a case that had remained open and unsolved for nearly 4 decades. Adams was then officially charged with first-degree slaying following his confession to taking the life of Jerry Watkins. Currently, Adams is being held at the North Central Regional Jail on a $1 million bond. Law enforcement officials have indicated that additional charges could be filed as the investigation continues. The authorities are combing through old case files and reviewing Adams's previous statements for any other potential inconsistencies or details that could strengthen the case against him. Sometimes Jerry would look at his giggling baby sister in 1985 and ask his mother in a thrilled shriek, "Mommy! Mommy, when is she gonna walk?" His sister, 38-year-old Jamie Cole, said, "Unfortunately, that day never came for him, and that hurts. That has always been pretty painful for me." She said that after the news of the arrest, she and her mother are still trying to cope. She said, "We are both numb. There is a sense of relief. Well, I do not know if relief is the right word for it." In the spring of 1975, Sharron Prior, a 16-year-old with dreams of becoming a veterinarian, vanished from her Point St. Charles neighborhood in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Her disappearance sparked a frantic search that ended in heartbreak when her lifeless body was found days later. For nearly 5 decades, the mystery of her tragic demise continued, until breakthroughs in DNA testing and the resolve of her family uncovered the chilling truth. Sharron Prior, born on February 9, 1959, in Pointe St. Charles, Montreal, spent much of her time at the local Boys and Girls Club. She participated in various sports like floor hockey and basketball, embodying an athleticism that matched her adventurous personality. In her family of 5 siblings, Sharron stood out for her bright disposition and close bonds, particularly with her twin sisters, Maureen and Doreen. Sharron was a dedicated student and made sure to put her effort into studies at Verdun High School. By all accounts, Sharron had all the potential of a promising future. It would be a future that would tragically be taken too soon. On March 29, 1975, it was Easter weekend, and Sharron's day began with the familiar routines of family and holiday preparations in their home at 445 Congregation Street. As the sun went down, the Prior family gathered for dinner, and after dinner was over, one of Sharron's longtime friends stopped by. They then left the home around 7:10 p.m. and headed towards Marina's Pizzeria, a popular hangout just 5 blocks away on Wellington and Ash Avenue. She intended to meet up with friends and her boyfriend, John McAleer, as she often did. Her friend offered to accompany her, but Sharron assured her she would be fine alone. It was the last time her friend would ever see Sharron alive. Sharron typically returned home by 11 p.m., rarely later than 1 a.m., and was always thoughtful to call if delayed. That night, however, no call came, and Sharron did not return home. Concern grew quickly among her family and friends. Days passed with no sign of Sharron, prompting a community-wide search effort that included classmates from Verdun High School and local authorities combing the neighborhood in desperate hope of finding her safe. 3 days later, those hopes would be dashed when Sharron's lifeless body was found in Longueuil Field. The field was maintained by a local beekeeper who typically secured it with a padlocked gate. That day, the beekeeper noticed the gate unexpectedly opened. When he approached the area, he discovered Sharron's body lying in the snow. The autopsy performed revealed a disturbingly violent end for Sharron. Her jeans and underwear had been removed, and she had been tied up, assaulted, and asphyxiated with her body covered in bruises. She had 2 jaw fractures, a broken nose, and a hole in one of her cheeks, likely caused when one of her teeth had become loose during the struggle. The investigators believed that she had passed away from her internal injuries, and that when she was dumped in the field, she had still been alive. As the investigation for Sharron's slaying case began, the police theorized that the remote location of her body was chosen because the perpetrator assumed that the field would not be used until late spring, allowing the body to remain undetected. Blood trails lead investigators to believe that more than one person was involved. The investigation considered various theories. One detective suggested Sharron might have accepted a ride from someone on her way to the restaurant before she was attacked. Another theory was that a trucker passing through was responsible. There was also the possibility of a serial perpetrator. Quebec had numerous unsolved cases involving women similar in appearance to Sharron. In fact, at the same time, a 22-year-old woman reported an attempted kidnapping by a tall, white, English-speaking man with blue eyes, brown hair, and a mustache on the same street where Sharron was abducted, raising suspicions that it could have been the same man. As months turned into years, the trail went cold. Despite the initial intensity of the case and numerous leads, no arrests were made, and the case remained unsolved. Decades later, the case of Sharron Prior experienced a breakthrough with advancements in DNA technology. In 2022, investigators revisited the evidence with fresh eyes and new methods, hoping to uncover what had eluded them for so long. DNA samples taken from the crime scene were reanalyzed using advanced techniques not available during the original investigation. This re-examination gave investigators a DNA match to the Romine family from Charleston, West Virginia. In May 2023, the match led them to Franklin Maywood Romine, who passed away in 1982. Romine was a convicted offender with a criminal record. He had been living in Montreal and Longueuil at the time of Sharron's disappearance. Although not initially a suspect, Romin's DNA matched the DNA found at the crime scene. His physical description also matched the abductor seen on that same street. Unfortunately, with Romin passing away in 1983, authorities could not make an arrest. Despite this, the confirmation brought a mixture of relief and renewed sorrow to Sharron's family. While the identification provided long-awaited answers, it also resurfaced the pain of their loss. Sharron Prior's family never gave up hope that one day they would find answers and justice for their beloved daughter and sister. Their unwavering determination, combined with advances in DNA technology, ultimately brought the truth to light. Though the knowing who was responsible for Sharron's demise came too late for an arrest, it provided a sense of closure for the family and proved the importance of persistence in cold cases. During the news conference, the family thanked the police on both sides of the border for the miracle of science that led them to their sister's perpetrator. Sharron's sister Doreen said, "The solving of Sharron's case will never bring Sharron back, but knowing that her perpetrator is no longer on this earth and will not take anyone's life anymore brings us to somewhat of a closure." Sharron's other sister Maureen said, "We will always be your mom, your little brother and sisters who sat there at that window that Easter weekend, hoping to see you walking on home. You may never have come back to our house or Congregation Street that weekend, but you have never left our hearts and you never will. We love you, Sharron. Now may you truly rest in peace." In the quiet of an October morning in 1987, Boise, Idaho's serene streets were shattered by a heinous crime. 65-year-old Joyce Casper, beloved owner of a local shop, was found slain in her car. Then, 36 years later, a breakthrough in forensic science offered answers to the questions behind her tragic end. Joyce Casper's career as a small business owner began when she opened Casper's Vista Hallmark shop in the Vista Village Shopping Center, a venture that quickly became a cherished neighborhood fixture. Her passion for life and commitment to others left a mark on all who knew her, making her untimely demise in 1987 all the more shocking and heartbreaking for the people of Boise. On the morning of October 13th, 1987, Joyce's life came to a violent end. Her body was discovered inside her car at Day Drive and Robert Street. Mere blocks from her beloved store, she had been strangled and assaulted. In the weeks leading up to her tragic fate, Joyce had reported a terrifying encounter at her shop, involving a young man between the ages of 17 and 25 with slicked back black hair. The male assailant had apparently attempted to assault Joyce at her business. After a brief altercation, he fled eastbound from the shop, fueling speculation that the tragic slaying might have been an act of retaliation. Although there was the presence of male DNA at the crime scene, forensic technology of the time proved insufficient to identify her assailant. The DNA collected did give investigators a profile of the suspect as a young Latino man with brown or hazel eyes and brown or black hair. This genetic fingerprint, though crucial, did not help identify a specific individual due to the lack of databases like CODIS at the time. Joyce's case went on as a haunting mystery that Boise police refused to let go unsolved. Over the years, it was reopened multiple times, each instance bringing new hope fueled by advancements in technology. Detective Paul Yagosh recalled the exhaustive efforts with more than 145 suspects meticulously investigated and eliminated from suspicion. Detective Josiah Ransom's dedication to the case was unwavering. He pursued every lead with tenacity, leveraging forensic laboratories and traveling across state lines to gather crucial DNA samples from individuals in genetic genealogy databases. This meticulous approach was evidence of the department's commitment to leveraging cutting-edge technology and exhaustive investigative methods in their pursuit of justice for Joyce. In 2017, Detective Jagosh collaborated with Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in DNA phenotyping and genetic genealogy. Parchman utilized advanced DNA analysis techniques to create a genetic profile of the suspect, providing insights into his ancestry, physical traits, and potential familial relationships. This profile suggested a likely connection to someone of Puerto Rican descent, offering a narrower focus for investigators. Then in 2019, Jagosh enlisted the expertise of Identifinders International. Using the DNA profile obtained earlier, Identifinders began constructing a family tree based on genetic matches found in public and private genetic databases. This meticulous process involved combing through thousands of potential relatives to trace common genetic markers back to the suspect. In July 2023, through painstaking research and cross-referencing, Identifinders narrowed down the family tree to a specific lineage that eventually led to Frank A. Rodriguez in 2023. Although Rodriguez took his own life in 2007, his genetic profile matched the DNA found at the crime scene. Investigators found that Rodriguez's family members were not entirely surprised by the revelation that he was implicated in Joyce's case. Based on discussions with his family, it appeared that Rodriguez had a troubled past and behavioral patterns that aligned with the circumstances surrounding the crime. This included his presence in the vicinity of Joyce's business before her untimely demise and his potential involvement in previous altercations in the area. After 36 years of persistent investigation, the Boise Police Department's relentless pursuit of justice for Joyce Casper has finally come to an end. Captain Matt Jones said, "The Boise Police Department would like to recognize the efforts of all involved in this complex investigation. While nothing can bring back their lost loved one, we are proud that after 36 years and countless hours of investigation, we were able to bring some form of closure to the Casper family." Joyce's son, Chuck Casper, said, "Every chapter in your life needs an end, an outcome. And until the crime was solved, we just did not know. Everybody wants to know the end of a story, even sad ones." Pauline Casper, Joyce's daughter, said, "It is hard to put into words, to put a face to this person that did this horrendous thing to your mother. But when we saw a picture of him, he just seemed like a guy. Some guy you might see walking down the street. It was really disorienting in a way." Joyce's children said that they have mixed feelings about Rodriguez's demise. He will never be brought to justice, but at the same time, they wondered if an early demise prevented him from harming others. They also think a trial would have been difficult for them. Two women's lives were brutally taken in 1990 in Lee County, Florida. Robin Cornell and Lisa Story's lives were taken by a perpetrator known as a seemingly private individual with a troubling personality. Finally, after decades, his shocking actions brought him into the limelight, and the dramatic revelations led to a long-awaited quest for justice. On May 8, 1990, Jan Cornell visited her boyfriend's house, leaving her close friend, Lisa Story, to babysit her 11-year-old daughter, Robin Cornell. Lisa, who was 32 years old at the time, was a trusted and beloved friend of the family. Tragically, when Jan returned to her Cape Coral apartment the following day, she discovered a horrifying scene. Both Robin and Lisa had been brutally slain, their lifeless bodies found suffocated inside the apartment. As the investigators began examining the crime scene, they found that the apartment had been ransacked. There were clear signs of a violent struggle, but most disturbing was the evidence left behind by the perpetrator. Male DNA was found on the bedsheet, pillowcase, and inside Robin's body, suggesting that the crime had sexual undertones. Despite this crucial piece of forensic evidence, the technology available at the time was limited, making it difficult for authorities to extract more leads from the scene. The investigation into the slayings of Robin and Lisa began immediately, but it quickly hit a wall. With few substantial clues and the forensic tools of the era still in their early stages, the detectives struggled to build a solid case. Investigators worked tirelessly, but as days turned into weeks, the trail of leads grew cold. For nearly 3 decades, the case of Robin and Lisa remained unsolved. The case was reopened in 2020, and new forensic techniques led to a DNA match. The match was to Joseph Zieler. He was arrested in 2016 on an unrelated assault charge. As part of the standard procedure, he was required to submit a DNA sample. To the shock of investigators, his DNA matched the forensic evidence found at the crime scene of the 1990 double slaying of Robin Cornell and Lisa Story. Joseph Zieler was born in 1962 and raised by his parents in the United States of America. He holds American nationality and belongs to the white ethnicity, identifying himself as a follower of Christianity. Throughout his life, Zieler maintained a very private lifestyle, avoiding the spotlight and keeping most details about his personal life hidden from public scrutiny. His reserved nature extended to his family life, where he was rarely seen in the media's glare. Zieler is married to Bonnie Nicely, and together they have a son named Zachary Zieler. Despite having a seemingly ordinary family life, Zieler's character has been described as arrogant, with his behavior often raising concerns. He was known to engage in questionable and illegal activities, though many of the details remained under wraps. His interactions with others often portrayed a troubling personality, one that eventually led to tragic consequences. Tragedy struck when Zieler allegedly took the life of his son, Zachary. According to reports, the weapon used in this shocking crime was a pellet gun. The incident left the community in disbelief, as Zieler's actions defied the image of a private, yet seemingly intact family unit. The crime left a permanent scar on those who knew him, shattering any illusions of normalcy in his household. Zieler's DNA, however, was the breakthrough that finally reopened the case of Robin and Lisa and identified him as the prime suspect in this brutal case. Following his arrest, Zieler's menacing and manipulative behavior became even more apparent. He sought to intimidate Jan Cornell, the mother of 11-year-old Robin, by sending her 3 threatening letters. In these letters, Zieler warned her to obstruct the investigation, implying that there would be dire consequences if she failed to do so. His threats were an attempt to sow fear and gain control, despite being behind bars. The letters revealed a man unrepentant and dangerous, showing no remorse for the devastating pain he had caused. His intimidation tactics failed, however, as the investigation proceeded undeterred by his threats. During his trial in May 2023, Zieler put forth an extraordinary and bizarre defense. He claimed that his DNA was found at the crime scene because he had allegedly had consensual intercourse with Jan Cornell, months before the slayings took place. This shocking claim was his attempt to explain away the presence of his male DNA, which had been found on the bed linens and inside Robin's body. Jan Cornell said she had never even met her daughter's perpetrator before the slayings and was disgusted by his outrageous claims. She said, "He is remorseless. He is evil. There are no feelings there. He is just blank." However, the court and jury were not swayed by this narrative. Zieler's story lacked credibility and contradicted the overwhelming forensic evidence that placed him at the scene of the crime. His desperate attempt to deflect responsibility only reinforced his culpability in the eyes of the public and the legal system. On June 26, 2023, the day of his sentencing, Joseph Zieler displayed a final act of defiance and violence in court. As Jan Cornell sat in the gallery, watching the proceedings that would bring her some semblance of closure, Zieler suddenly lashed out. In a shocking outburst, he elbowed his own attorney, Kevin Shirley, striking him in the head, which led to an immediate commotion in the courtroom. Officers quickly subdued Zieler, wrestling him to the ground as he protested that his attorney had failed to defend him adequately. This violent act was emblematic of Zieler's volatile nature, reinforcing the danger he posed, even while standing on the brink of sentencing. Attorney Shirley said that he was fine after the incident. He said, "I had no idea he was going to do something like that. Obviously, he has been planning on that, but as he was going down, He said he was sorry he missed. Ultimately, Joseph Zeeler was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree slaying. After a 5-hour deliberation, the jury voted 10-2 in favor of the end-of-life penalty. The judge followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Zeeler to end of life for taking the lives of Robin Cornell and Lisa Story. For the families of the victims, the verdict marked the end of a long and agonizing journey toward justice. In the shadows beneath a Des Moines, Iowa bridge, Stanley Golinsky met a tragic fate. Found under the railway tracks, his demise was shrouded in mystery, with investigators wondering if it was an accident, if he took his own life, or something more sinister. Nearly a decade later, a shocking confession would put an end to the long-standing mystery and confirm what one detective may have known all along. 56-year-old Stanley Golinsky lived a humble yet meaningful life that touched many in Des Moines. Originally from Indiana, Pennsylvania, he relocated to Des Moines in 2009, seeking a fresh start. Despite facing challenges like periods of homelessness and occasional legal issues, Stanley remained resilient. On a fateful day in October 2012, Stanley's life took a tragic turn under a downtown Des Moines railroad bridge. His lifeless body was found by a passerby along the bike trail on the west bank of the Des Moines River. The discovery was made after a concerned individual, unable to call for help due to a cell phone with no battery life, sought assistance from a nearby construction worker. This led to a 911 call, prompting Des Moines police to investigate the scene. Subsequent investigations and an autopsy later confirmed that Stanley had been the victim of a senseless slaying. His injuries, initially unclear, pointed towards a violent end inflicted by another person. Lieutenant Tim Peake led a relentless investigation into the tragic case, spending months navigating the camps along the riverbanks and interviewing numerous individuals within the Des Moines homeless community Stanley was a part of. During his investigation, Peake uncovered disturbing details about a man named William Billy Ruley, who is known for his intimidation tactics and bullying behavior towards the homeless. Many spoke of their fear of Ruley, and despite Peake's suspicions that Ruley could somehow be involved, he faced a daunting challenge: lack of concrete evidence. The case remained cold for years, with investigators frustratingly close to finding answers, but just out of reach. But after years of meticulous investigation, a breakthrough came in the form of a shocking confession. On September 20th, 2021, William Ruley, who was already serving a 25-year sentence for another crime, approached a corrections officer at Anamosa State Penitentiary. He expressed a desire to unburden himself of the guilt that had weighed on him for years and confessed to taking the life of Stanley Golinsky. After his confession, Lieutenant Tim Peake recounted how Ruley provided specific, graphic details about the crime. Details known only to a select few within the police department. This solidified Peake's conviction that Ruley was the perpetrator he had been hunting all along. Ruley's confession led to his formal charge of first-degree slaying in October 2021, alongside his existing sentence for burglary, ensuring that he would face justice for both crimes concurrently. On February 23rd, 2023, at his sentencing, Ruley apologized, saying, "I would like to change and will do a lot better and work through the prison system and take classes, or whatever I need to do better." 36-year-old Ruley was sentenced to 50 years in prison and must serve at least 35 before becoming eligible for parole. He told Lieutenant Peake that part of the reason for coming forward was that he was coming up for parole and had no place to go, preferring to live in prison. For Lieutenant Peake and those that knew Stanley, the closure of the case brought relief after years of the pursuit of truth. An unsettling discovery of a woman's remains in a wooded area off Riverside Drive in Macon, Georgia, was made on September 8, 1977. This horrifying scene, marked by scattered body parts and a foul odor that had plagued the neighborhood for weeks, became a mystery, a mystery that would remain unresolved for more than 4 decades, revealing the grim connection to one of America's most notorious serial offenders. On September 8, 1977, the remains of a woman were found in a wooded area off Riverside Drive, roughly 1 mile north of Arkwright Road. The remains were discovered in the front yard of a house, a location that had drawn attention due to reports of a foul odor from the neighborhood over the past 6 weeks. Upon investigation, it was clear that animals had disturbed the scene, scattering the remains throughout the area. Despite an extensive search, only certain body parts were recovered, including her hands, shoulder blades, some limbs, and parts of her torso. The search efforts in the area yielded little additional evidence, leaving authorities without crucial parts of the woman's body, which hindered the investigation. With so much of the remains missing, determining a clear cause of demise became a significant challenge for law enforcement. The decomposed state of the body further complicated efforts to gather physical evidence that might explain what had happened to the woman in the weeks leading up to the discovery. While authorities were unable to officially determine how the woman had met her end, there was widespread suspicion that she had been strangled. Given the condition of the body and the lack of conclusive forensic evidence, this theory remained unproven. Investigators believed that whoever was responsible for her demise had likely disposed of her body in the wooded area, leaving it to the elements and local wildlife to obscure the evidence. In 2012, Kentucky authorities made a pivotal breakthrough in their investigation when they arrested Samuel Little on illegal substance charges. This arrest proved crucial as forensic analysis of his DNA linked him to 3 slayings in California. This connection prompted a deeper examination of Little's criminal history, revealing a disturbing pattern of violence that spanned several decades and multiple states. In 2018, Little came forward with confessions related to his past crimes, including a slaying from 1977, the same year as the case involving the unidentified woman whose remains were discovered on Riverside Drive. While the details of his statements about this particular victim have not been publicly disclosed, it was reported that Little reacted strongly to a reconstruction of the victim's appearance. He expressed dissatisfaction with the likeness, asserting that it did not accurately reflect the woman he had encountered. This reaction added an additional layer of complexity to the investigation, highlighting the challenges in identifying victims from such a long time ago and incomplete evidence. Little's extensive criminal record revealed that between 1970 and 2005, he had taken the lives of up to 90 women across the United States. He told Texas Ranger James Holland that taking the lives of women were like an illegal substance to him. He said he came to like it. His victims were predominantly marginalized individuals, such as prostitutes and illegal substance addicts, whom often went unnoticed or were reported missing only after significant delays. Little strangled most of his victims, usually soon after meeting them during chance encounters, and he would not leave much evidence for the police. He was not wrong. The police around the country initially classified many of the demises as accidents, illegal substance overdoses, or the result of unknown causes. His confessions led to his conviction for 8 slayings in 3 states, and he was linked to 61 additional slayings, marking him as one of the most prolific serial offenders in American history. Despite his convictions and confessions, investigations into Little's full range of crimes are ongoing. The authorities continue to explore whether he was involved in other unsolved cases, striving to piece together the complete scope of his violent activities. Samuel Little's demise in 2020, at nearly 80 years old, in prison, did not end the quest for justice. Instead, it underscored the complexity of his crimes and the enduring efforts to resolve the numerous unsolved cases associated with him. Just before he lost his life, he said that there were probably innocent people in jail for some of his crimes. He said, "Probably be numerous people who are or has been convicted and sent to penitentiary on my behalf. I say, if I can help get somebody out of jail, God might smile a little bit more on me." Little spoke mostly about his victims. He also said, They were broke and homeless, and they walked right into my spiderweb. The investigation into Little's criminal activities remain a priority for law enforcement agencies. The case of the unidentified woman from 1977, among others, continued to be scrutinized as investigators seek to confirm whether Little's confessions can provide closure for the victims and their families. The Bibb County Sheriff's Office, in collaboration with the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, CCJCC, made significant strides in solving the cold case involving the unidentified woman found in 1977 by leveraging advanced DNA technology provided by the forensic company Othram. They were able to make a breakthrough in May 2023. The technology enabled them to identify the victim as Yvonne Pless, a young woman who was approximately 19 to 20 years old at the time of her demise. The connection between Yvonne Pless and Samuel Little was confirmed through his confessions, including statements he made during a 2019 interview with 60 Minutes. Little's admissions about the 1977 case aligned with the details of the Macon cold case, validating the long-held suspicion that he was responsible for her demise. This crucial piece of evidence linked Little definitively to the case, solving a mystery that had remained unresolved for over 4 decades. While Yvonne's identity was established, her family was not immediately known, complicating efforts to notify them. On November 14, 2023, the resolution of the case was publicly announced, bringing closure to a 46-year-long mystery. A tragic discovery of an infant's body in a remote area along South Carolina Highway 544 was made on December 4, 2008. This heartbreaking event, involving the demise of a viable child exposed to the elements, became a mystery that would challenge investigators and captivate the community. On December 4, 2008, the deceased infant was located by utility workers wrapped in a tote bag and placed inside a box in a wooded area along South Carolina Highway 544, on the outskirts of Conway in Horry County, South Carolina. The discovery was made in a secluded spot, indicating that the child had been deliberately hidden. Coroner reports revealed that the cause of demise was hypothermia, resulting from exposure to the cold elements. The investigation into the infant's demise, known as Baby Boy Horry, faced significant challenges from the outset. The authorities struggled to find any leads that could identify the child or reveal the circumstances leading to the infant's abandonment. The lack of information and clues restricted the efforts to uncover the identity of the child or the person responsible for this heart-wrenching act. As the weeks and months passed, the case ran out of viable leads, and eventually, the case was declared a cold case, marking a somber conclusion to an investigation that had begun with such promise. On March 3, 2020, the Horry County Police Department released significant new information in the case of Baby Boy Horry, thanks to a tip from the child's father, Ronald Woodham III. The revelation came after physical evidence linked Jennifer Lynn Sarr, formerly Jennifer Rickle, to the crime. At the time, Sarr, 32, was a student at Coastal Carolina University and resided in Pensacola, Florida. Her arrest took place in North Myrtle Beach, marking a pivotal development in the case. Following her arrest, Sarr was detained at the J. Rubin Long Detention Center in Conway. On March 6, 2020, Sarr appeared before the court for a bond hearing, where she was denied bail. During this hearing, Solicitor Jimmy Richardson read a heartfelt letter from Ronald Woodham III, who was unable to attend the proceedings in person. The letter conveyed a request for privacy and respect as the family mourned the loss of their only child. It expressed gratitude towards those who had contributed to the pursuit of justice, including the Rolling Thunder Motorcycle Club and community members who had remembered the child on his birthdays. The letter further emphasized the family's need for continued prayers and support during this challenging period. Sarr was later released on bail while awaiting trial. On September 15, 2022, she reached a plea deal and pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter, with the original charge of slaying by child abuse being dropped. During the court proceedings, Sar expressed profound remorse and sorrow for her actions. She conveyed a heartfelt apology to everyone present, acknowledging her deep regret over her inability to help her child on that fateful night. Sar said that while she was in her sophomore year at Coastal Carolina University, she had a brief relationship with Ronald Woodham III. They had engaged in intercourse. In August 2008, she had visited a doctor on the university's campus due to feeling unwell, with numbness in her hands and feet. Sar claimed she was never told she was pregnant. Later in December 2008, she was in her room in the house she had been staying in when she began excessively bleeding and was in excruciating pain. She gave birth to the baby and then passed out. When she awoke, the baby showed no signs of life like crying or moving. Sar spoke about her reliance on divine strength to address the gravity of her actions and her ongoing struggle with the guilt she felt since the incident. Her statements reflected a sincere attempt to come to terms with her past actions and seek forgiveness from those affected by the tragedy. In her emotional address, Sar vowed to strive to be a better person and mother for her remaining 5-year and 2-year-old children. She sought understanding and forgiveness from the court and the affected families, extending her prayers and apologies to everyone in the courtroom. Her plea for peace and understanding highlighted her desire to make amends and find a path to redemption. In June 2023, Sar was ultimately sentenced to 10 years in prison, with 6 years of that sentence suspended. Additionally, she was ordered to pay $1,700 to the Horry County Coroner's Office. Her 2 children were the most important consideration in the sentence, Circuit Court Judge Paul Birch said, and he prayed they will be taken care of while their mother is incarcerated. The prosecutor acknowledged that Sar has lived a wonderful life since 2008. She has a loving family and graduated college in 2010 with honors. But prison time was necessary to send a strong message about abandoning a baby, the prosecutor told the judge. Ronald Woodham III, baby Horry's father, told the judge he had compassion for Sar but questioned what message a slap on the wrist would send. He said, "I'm not looking for a sentencing that is too long or anything. I have compassion. I feel bad for her. I feel bad for her husband. I feel bad for her children. I do. I want to say if he was really alive and froze to his end, my future was robbed." Nancy McEvers, a devoted mother living in Washington County, Oregon, tragically lost her life. A gentle and loving woman caught in a tumultuous marriage's life unraveled into a chilling mystery that would remain unsolved for decades. Nancy McEvers was a 28-year-old woman living in Washington County in 1983. She was married to Randy McEvers, and together they had a 1-year-old son. Despite her gentle nature, Nancy's life was far from peaceful, as her marriage was often described as tumultuous. Her relationship with Randy was fraught with difficulties. Her family and close friends believed that Randy was abusive, a suspicion that had grown over time. Nancy had confided in some of her loved ones that she was planning to leave Randy as the marriage had become toxic and unsafe. She had been struggling to find a way out, torn between protecting herself and securing a stable future for her young son. On the morning of January 2nd, 1983, at around 10:30 a.m., Randy McEvers placed a 911 call reporting that his 28-year-old wife, Nancy McEvers (Nee Pepper), had taken her own life. The authorities quickly arrived at the couple's home, where they discovered Nancy suffering from a gunshot wound to the head. Paramedics rushed her to a nearby hospital, but despite their efforts, she was pronounced deceased shortly after arrival. The scene was tragic and immediately raised questions about what had transpired within the McEvers household that morning. According to Randy, only he, Nancy, and their 1-year-old son were in the house when the incident occurred. However, when questioned by deputies, Randy's account of the events was inconsistent. He gave 2 conflicting explanations of what happened leading up to Nancy's demise. These discrepancies caused concern among the officers, prompting them to call in detectives to take a closer look at the case. Randy's conflicting statements cast doubt on his claim that Nancy had taken her own life. As the investigation moved forward, detectives collected forensic evidence, conducted an autopsy, and examined the firearm involved in the shooting. Though forensic technology was limited in 1983, the evidence they gathered began to suggest that Nancy's demise was not self-inflicted. The findings from the autopsy, as well as tests on the gun, contradicted Randy's version of events. By April of that year, Randy stopped cooperating with investigators altogether, refusing to provide any further information or clarification about the incident. Without Randy's cooperation and no other significant leads to follow, the investigation hit a roadblock. Although the evidence pointed to foul play rather than someone who took their own life, detectives were unable to gather enough concrete proof to move forward. As the months passed, progress in the case slowed, and by August 1983, investigators officially suspended the investigation due to a lack of new information, leaving the case unsolved and cold. In August 2022, nearly 40 years after Nancy McEvers' demise, detectives from the Violent Crimes Unit, tasked with cold case investigations, reopened her case. After decades of unanswered questions, this new investigation offered a glimmer of hope that the truth behind Nancy's tragic demise might finally come to light. Over the following months, detectives diligently pursued multiple new leads that had surfaced, breathing new life into a case that had long been cold. The Washington County Sheriff's Office Forensic Science Unit reanalyzed key pieces of evidence collected from the original 1983 investigation. Working in collaboration with the Oregon State Police Crime Lab, they carefully reviewed the forensic findings from that time. After a detailed analysis, the crime lab confirmed that the 1983 results, which had ruled out someone taking their own life, were still accurate and scientifically sound. Detectives also conducted extensive interviews with over 20 individuals connected to the original case, including detectives, deputies, and firefighters. Their recollections, paired with modern investigative techniques, uncovered additional key details that had not been documented during the original investigation. In January 2023, detectives reached a critical turning point in the decades-old investigation when they located Randy McEvers, living in Tigard, Oregon. After years of silence and evasion, Randy finally agreed to sit down for an interview. The interview was a long-awaited moment for investigators, who had always suspected Randy knew more than he had revealed. Following this interview, detectives felt they had gathered sufficient evidence to push the case forward. With renewed determination, they referred the case to the Washington County District Attorney's Office for formal review. However, before the district attorney could complete their review, the investigation took a tragic and unexpected turn. On February 8, 2023, just a month after his interview with detectives, Randy took his own life. Randy's demise effectively silenced him forever, closing off any possibility of further questioning or gaining more insight into what had truly happened the morning Nancy passed away. For those involved in the investigation, it was a heartbreaking and frustrating conclusion to a case that had spanned nearly 4 decades. With Randy no longer able to face legal scrutiny or provide further testimony, the Washington County Sheriff's Office officially closed the cold case. Janet Iglesias, Nancy's sister, said, "We grieved for Nancy many years ago. For so many people, they thought she took her own life, but we knew it never was. We always thought it was a terrible accident, but we had no information to tell us anything different." Diane Grill, Nancy's other sister, said, "We have been relieved of going and being drugged through a trial. It has been hard. It has been hard for 40 years. Like my sister said, we have gotten the answers now that we need to put it to closure." Nancy's family says it is likely the only admission of guilt they would ever receive, but they are grateful to finally have answers. Lenore Pepper, Nancy's mom, said, "I am just thankful too that I am still here to see the end of this. I wish my husband were here, but he would have been very sad. I feel we got justice, but like I say, in a very strange way. But at my age, I do not know if I could have gone to a trial every day, so we have to accept. That is all we can do." The detectives have phone calls with Nancy's co-workers and Randy's friends that said that Randy had been planning to take Nancy's life due to Nancy wanting to separate and divorce. Clifford Smith, a devoted husband, disappeared without a trace on Halloween night in 1982. It took more than 30 years to uncover the shocking truth behind his demise when a remarkable breakthrough finally brought the case to light. Clifford Smith was born in 1958, and by the time he turned 24, he had settled into what seemed like the beginning of a peaceful and fulfilling life in Indiana. However, all of that would take a tragic and unexpected turn on October 31st, 1982, when Clifford was last seen or heard from. Clifford's wife, who grew increasingly worried after days passed without any word from her husband, reported him missing to the authorities 4 days later, on November 4th. This marked the beginning of an extensive search operation. Local law enforcement, along with volunteers, launched a full-scale investigation to find Clifford. Flyers were distributed, and search parties combed through nearby areas, hoping to find any clue that could explain his sudden disappearance. Despite these efforts, no evidence surfaced in the early days. Clifford had simply vanished, leaving behind no obvious signs of what could have happened. The search continued for over a month, with investigators exploring every possible lead. But it was not until some days after Clifford had gone missing that the search came to a heartbreaking end. On December 1st, 1982, Clifford Smith's body was discovered along the White River in rural Jackson County, Indiana. His remains were found in a remote area that had not been part of the initial search efforts. The investigation revealed that he lost his life due to a gunshot wound to the head. The discovery of his body, approximately 45 days after he had been reported missing, left both his family and the investigators devastated. The condition of his body provided little insight into the circumstances of his disappearance or demise, deepening the mystery that had already surrounded the case. His demise was quickly classified as suspicious, and law enforcement launched a slaying investigation. Over the years, the police pursued numerous leads, conducting interviews and revisiting the scene where his body had been found. Unfortunately, none of these efforts led to significant breakthroughs. As time passed, the case grew colder, and while authorities remained committed to solving the case, their attempts were met with repeated ends. The case was reopened in 2015 by state police, who embarked on a renewed investigation with the hope of uncovering the truth. Detectives conducted a series of interviews, including extensive discussions with Ronald Jack Anderson, a longtime acquaintance of Clifford, and Joyce Smith, Clifford's wife. Over several years, these interviews, coupled with a meticulous review of the original investigation, began to reveal new insights and inconsistencies that had previously gone unnoticed. The collection of fresh evidence and the re-examination of old leads ultimately culminated in the issuance of an arrest warrant. On October 31st, 2023, 61-year-old Anderson was arrested at his home in Seymour, Indiana, and charged with ending the life of Clifford Smith. According to the investigators, Anderson had taken a shotgun from a residence on East 13th Street in Seymour on the night of October 30th, 1982. He then loaded the weapon before leaving with Clifford. Witnesses confirmed that Anderson and Clifford were among a group of individuals who had gathered at the residence earlier in the evening. As the night wore on and the gathering dispersed, Anderson and Clifford left together, with Anderson in possession of the shotgun. This crucial piece of information aligned with the testimonies gathered, painting a grim picture of the events that transpired on that fateful night. Detectives believe that after leaving the residence, Anderson used the shotgun to fatally wound Clifford before disposing of his body along the White River in rural Jackson County. Further scrutiny of Anderson's actions in the days following the slaying uncovered additional damning evidence. It was determined that Anderson had returned the shotgun to the residence on 13th Street shortly after the crime. Anderson also revisited the scene along the White River, presumably to conceal any remaining evidence that might implicate him in Clifford's demise. These deliberate actions to cover up the crime only served to strengthen the case against him. With Anderson in custody, the case that had baffled investigators for over 3 decades finally moved towards resolution. In the woods of Forsyth County, Georgia, a family's peaceful evening walk in June 2019 turned into a moment of heart-stopping discovery. The sound of a baby's faint cries led them to a horrifying sight: an infant tied up in a plastic bag, left abandoned. Dubbed Baby India, the newborn's miraculous survival captivated the nation, but for years, the identity of the person responsible remained a mystery, until DNA evidence led investigators to the shocking truth. On the evening of June 6, 2019, a family living near Daves Creek Road in Forsyth County was startled by the faint sound of a baby's cries coming from the woods. Concerned and unable to locate the source of the cries, they called 911. Forsyth County Sheriff's deputies responded to the scene and made a grim discovery: a newborn baby wrapped in a plastic bag, tied shut, and abandoned in the dense woods. Body cam footage from Deputy Terry Roper, who responded to the call, captured the intense moment he tore open the bag to reveal the infant, still alive, with her umbilical cord attached. The baby was rushed to a nearby hospital, where she was found to be in good condition. Weighing 6 pounds, 5 ounces, the nurses lovingly named her Baby India. In the days following the discovery, Sheriff Ron Freeman described the situation as both miraculous and heartbreaking. Authorities emphasized that the baby had been left in a way that suggested she was not meant to be found. Despite the heart-wrenching nature of the case, no immediate leads on the mother or how the baby ended up in the woods emerged. For years, the case remained unsolved. Law enforcement appealed to the public for information, releasing the body cam footage in hopes that it would stir memories or tips. More than 1,000 people across the country expressed interest in adopting Baby India, but the identity of her biological parents remained elusive. The major breakthrough in the case came in 2022. After years of searching, investigators used advanced DNA technology to trace Baby India's lineage. Through genetic data, they were able to identify the child's biological father. Shockingly, the father claimed he had no knowledge of the pregnancy or the birth. Investigators followed this lead back to the mother, Karima Jawani, who was arrested in May 2023. Jawani was charged with criminal attempt to commit the act, first-degree cruelty to children, aggravated assault, and reckless abandonment. During the investigation, Sheriff Freeman disclosed that Jawani had a history of concealing pregnancies, suggesting that she had gone to great lengths to hide her pregnancy with Baby India. It is believed that after giving birth in her car, Jawani drove around before abandoning the newborn in a remote area, intending that the child would not be discovered. Jawani's arrest led to an emotional public response, as the community reflected on the miraculous survival of Baby India and the disturbing actions of the mother. In her initial court appearances, her attorneys argued that Jawani had been suffering from postpartum psychosis and depression at the time of the incident. Despite these arguments, the court denied her bond twice, citing her as a potential flight risk and concern for witness tampering. In August 2023, a grand jury indicted Jawani on 2 charges: criminal attempt to commit the act of lethal violence and first-degree cruelty to children. The indictment claimed that she, knowingly and intentionally, tried to end the life of Baby India by abandoning her in the woods, concealed in a plastic bag. Although earlier charges of aggravated assault and reckless abandonment were not included in the indictment, the prosecution was focused on the gravity of Jawani's actions in leaving the baby somewhere she was unlikely to be found. As of the latest updates, Baby India is a healthy child, living with an adoptive family. Authorities have shared very few details about her life since her rescue, citing security concerns. For many, the case remains bittersweet. The legal process for Karima Jawani continues, with her defense team maintaining that she was in the throes of a mental health crisis during the time of the incident. While the community, who has followed baby India's story closely, watches as justice is sought for the little girl who was left to her demise, but survived against all odds. In May 1975, a lifeless body was discovered in the Nation River in Ontario, Canada, known as the Nation River Lady. For years, she remained nameless, a victim lost to history. As time passed, her identity and the investigation faded into obscurity. But the case would not remain unsolved forever. In a shocking twist, her identity would only come to light years later, thanks to modern advancements in forensic science and a tenacious quest for justice. On May 3, 1975, the waters of the Nation River became the scene of a gruesome discovery. A farmer, tending to his fields, spotted a body floating face down, approximately 100 yards from the Highway 417 bridge. Initial examinations revealed that the unidentified woman had met a violent end, with evidence suggesting she had suffered a brutal strangulation. A 24-inch piece of black, plastic-covered coaxial cable was found loosely wrapped around her neck, accompanied by a kitchen towel and other cloths knotted tightly to create a ligature. Her hands and feet were bound with neckties. Disturbingly, her lungs contained no water, suggesting that her life had been cut short before being dumped in the river. A local store clerk recalled selling a tie to a couple shortly before the body was found. The man was described as being between 5 feet and 4 inches, and 5 feet and 6 inches, and around 35 years old, but no solid leads emerged to identify him. When the body was discovered in the Nation River, the investigators were faced with the task of identifying the victim. They initially hoped that the circumstances surrounding her demise would yield clues to her identity and the events leading to her tragic end. But despite the evidence found at the scene, identifying the woman proved to be an elusive challenge. The investigation took a series of frustrating turns. In 2018, a significant breakthrough occurred when authorities decided to exhume the remains of the unidentified woman known only as the Nation River Lady. This pivotal decision set in motion a series of events that would ultimately link her cold case to an entirely different investigation. Advancements in forensic technology, particularly DNA analysis, prompted a renewed examination of the remains. It was during this process that investigators successfully matched her DNA with that of Jewell Langford's family, finally revealing her identity to the public in July 2023. Jewell Parchman Langford, affectionately known as Lala, was born on March 30th, 1927 in Tennessee. After establishing herself in Tennessee, she married Atlas Langford, and together they carved out a successful career in the health and wellness sector. Their partnership was born out of a shared ambition and dedication, but like many relationships, it faced challenges and ultimately led to their divorce. Seeking a fresh start and new opportunities, she relocated to Montreal in the early 1970s. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Jewell had been navigating different aspects of her personal life, including a romantic relationship with a man named Rodney Mervyn Nichols. The nature of their relationship was ambiguous, the consensus being that Rodney was an acquaintance at best. Jewell was last seen on or after April 20th, 1975, when she seemingly vanished without a trace. In the weeks following her last known sighting, family and friends grew increasingly worried as attempts to contact her went unanswered. Their fears deepened when it became evident that she had not returned to her home or made any contact with her loved ones. Despite their desperate search for answers, investigators struggled to uncover the truth behind her disappearance. Jewell's family tirelessly sought information, but the police were unable to match the remains with any missing persons reports at the time. Jewell's family, still grieving her absence, placed a tombstone in her memory, while she was buried in a Toronto cemetery in 1987 as an unidentified victim. This identification not only brought closure to Jewell's loved ones, but also connected her case to the earlier investigation surrounding her mysterious disappearance. As investigators dug deeper into Jewell's life and relationships, they uncovered chilling details about her final days, linking her to a suspect, Rodney Mervyn Nichols, who had been living in Florida. After nearly half a century of unanswered questions, Nichols was charged with first-degree slaying in the case of Jewell Langford. The charges were based on both circumstantial evidence and the recent identification of her remains. Investigators believe that after her disappearance in April 1975, Nichols was involved in the events leading up to her demise in the disposal of her body in the Nation River, which was discovered weeks later. The evidence presented in court has not been disclosed in detail, but prosecutors are expected to argue that Nichols had both motive and opportunity to commit the crime. Nichols has confessed to taking Jewell's life. Jewell's loved ones, who had spent decades grappling with uncertainty and heartache, found a glimmer of hope in the prospect of justice being served. Given his age and reported health issues, including dementia, there are concerns about the possibility of a trial and whether Nichols would be deemed fit to stand before the court. Legal experts suggest that if found unfit for trial, the case may proceed differently, potentially leading to a civil commitment or other measures, rather than a traditional court trial. For Jewell's family, the journey toward justice still holds a lot of uncertainty, but they hold on to the hope that the legal system will finally bring resolution to their decades-long search for answers. Jewell's niece, Denise Chung, said, "I am heartbroken that my family did not get to know what happened before they passed away, but I am just so grateful that the police did not give up and that they kept working hard to try to solve it and figure out who she was." She said, "My grandmother sold everything. She spent every dime she had, hiring private investigators, trying to find my aunt. I know that my grandmother constantly called the local FBI, pushing and pushing because she did not want them to forget about Aunt Jewell, and she did not want to ever quit searching, and she did not quit searching until she passed away." In September of 1980, a quiet stretch of woodland in Nakamixon Township, Pennsylvania, became the site of a chilling slaying that would baffle investigators for over 4 decades. The victim, 34-year-old Richard Wesley Wheeler, was found lifeless, his body hidden deep in the woods. What initially seemed like a local crime soon unraveled into a decades-long mystery involving stolen yachts, illegal substance deals, and a fugitive criminal who vanished into thin air. Then, after years of unanswered questions, investigators finally cracked the case, revealing the dark secrets behind a conspiracy hatched in the confines of a federal prison. On September 18, 1980, in the dense woods of Nakamixon Township, Pennsylvania, the body of Richard Wesley Wheeler was discovered. His remains were found concealed on a wooded property just off Center Hill Road, roughly a mile from the intersection with Kintner Hill Road. He had been shot 4 times. The discovery of Richard's body triggered an immediate investigation by local authorities, who were initially perplexed by the lack of clear motive and the layers of secrecy surrounding the crime. The secluded location of his remains suggested that whoever had ended his life knew the area well, and the methodical nature of the disposal indicated careful planning. Investigators with the Bucks County District Attorney's Office and the Pennsylvania State Police initially had little to work with. Richard's past as a marijuana dealer and his connections to unsavory characters offered some potential leads. But the case quickly stalled due to the lack of physical evidence and reliable witnesses. The rural, wooded terrain where his body was found made it difficult for investigators to trace movements or identify a clear suspect. In the early stages of the investigation, the authorities were unaware of the full scope of the crime or the people involved. As the investigation unfolded, small pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. Investigators learned that Richard had been associating with individuals involved in the drug trade, particularly in connection with Leslie Schmidt. Interviews with people in the area, as well as former associates of Richard, hinted that he had been involved in a larger illegal substance operation, possibly tied to meth production. The first solid lead came when detectives began exploring Richard's time in Danbury Federal Prison. Through further digging, they uncovered that Richard, Schmidt, and Peter Eric Marshner had met while incarcerated there. This connection set off alarm bells for detectives, as it tied Richard to two individuals with a history of serious criminal activity. In the mid-1970s, Richard, Marshner, and Schmidt found themselves incarcerated in Danbury Federal Prison in Connecticut. Each man had a unique criminal background that would bring them together and change their lives forever. Richard Wesley Wheeler was a California native and a small-time marijuana dealer. He had a troubled past, at one point escaping from a California prison after being convicted for illegal, substance-related offenses. Richard's time in prison only solidified his criminal ambitions, and he yearned for a more significant operation once he was released. Leslie Schmidt, from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, was a seasoned methamphetamine dealer. He had connections in the substance world and understood what it took to run a narcotics business. Peter Eric Marshner, a German national nicknamed the Captain, had a history of grand larceny, specifically targeting yachts and boating equipment in the Caribbean. He had been incarcerated for stealing a 41-foot sailboat in Martinique and had a reputation for his cunning and resourcefulness. Marshner was skilled at manipulation, often finding ways to evade capture or legal consequences. The three men formed an unlikely alliance while in prison, bonding over shared experiences and ambitions. They often discussed their plans for the future, including a scheme to set up a methamphetamine lab in Upper Bucks County, Pennsylvania, upon their release. Their conversations were fueled by a common desire for financial gain and the thrill of the substances trade. Richard was released from prison first in November 1979. Eager to put their plans into action, he connected with Schmidt, who was still serving time but managed to secure a 30-day furlough. During this period, Schmidt introduced Richard to a friend who had property available for lease in Nockamixon Township. This connection was crucial as it allowed him to establish a base for the methamphetamine lab they had planned. While Schmidt was behind bars, he provided Richard with $250,000, supposedly to support Schmidt's family during his remaining time in prison. But Schmidt had ulterior motives, believing that the money would help Richard get the operation off the ground while ensuring a return on investment for himself. In July 1980, after serving his sentence, Marshner was supposed to be deported back to Germany, but during the chaos of a mechanical failure on his deportation flight at JFK Airport, he seized the opportunity to escape and vanished. Determined to continue his criminal pursuits, he returned to the United States and reconnected with Richard in Bucks County. He welcomed Marshner into his new operation, hiring him as a personal bodyguard and driver. Marshner's experience and willingness to engage in violence made him an asset to Richard, who was then living in a camper on the property where the meth lab was being set up. Despite the initial camaraderie, tensions began to rise. Schmidt, still in prison, started to worry that Richard was mishandling the substantial funds he had provided. He suspected that Richard was using the money for personal gain, rather than for the agreed-upon purpose of supporting Schmidt's family and establishing the meth lab. Feeling betrayed and paranoid, Schmidt devised a devious plan to regain control over the situation. Peter Eric Marshner and Leslie Schmidt, the two key players in the slaying of Richard, had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. After the crime was committed, Marshner, then 42 years old, fled the scene in Richard's pickup truck, crossing state lines into New Jersey. Despite investigators' suspicions, they struggled to locate Marshner, who had seemingly vanished without a trace. By 1983, investigators learned through witness statements that Schmidt had hired a German guy to pull the trigger. This vague description matched Marshner, but authorities could not find him. Marshner had successfully disappeared, evading justice for years. The case remained unsolved for decades, growing colder with each passing year. But in early 2023, investigators with the Bucks County District Attorney's Office and the Pennsylvania State Police revisited the case. A closer look at Marshner's criminal history finally provided the breakthrough they had been searching for. They discovered that Marshner had been arrested in 1982 on illegal substances conspiracy charges in New York under the name Charles McLaren. His fingerprints from the 1982 arrest were cross-referenced with records from his 1977 arrest in Martinique, confirming that Charles McLaren was, in fact, Marshner. By the time investigators connected the dots, Marshner had passed away in 2006, having lived under a new identity for more than 2 decades. Marshner had built a new life in New Jersey, running a limousine service in New York City, getting married, and raising children, all while hiding in plain sight. As for Schmidt, he remained a powerful figure in the Bucks County illegal substances world until he passed in 2022. His involvement in Richard's case was finally pieced together by detectives, who concluded that Schmidt had masterminded the slaying from behind bars, driven by greed and paranoia. With both Marshner and Schmidt deceased, and their roles in Richard's demise confirmed, the Bucks County District Attorney's Office officially declared the case solved. Richard's family was informed, bringing a semblance of closure to a mystery that had lingered for over 4 decades. In the summer of 1987, Carlsbad, New Mexico, was shattered by the brutal slaying of Donna Sue Hyatt, a cherished daughter, sister, mother, and grandmother. Found lifeless in her living room, she had been the victim of a horrific assault. Despite initial leads and a growing list of suspects, the investigation quickly stalled. For decades, Donna's vibrant spirit seemed overshadowed by the grim reality of her unsolved case, until the investigation was reignited using cutting-edge forensic techniques. Known for her sunny disposition and strong ties to her family and friends, Donna Sue Hyatt faced various personal challenges, but relied on her loved ones and faith to stay positive. On July 18, 1987, Donna was last seen leaving a nearby store with a tall, Caucasian male around 9:15 p.m. Later that evening, she was brutally assaulted and slain in her living room. The crime scene revealed that Donna had been assaulted, stabbed, and strangled. In the wake of the horrific crime, the Carlsbad Police Department launched an extensive investigation. Officers interviewed witnesses, collected evidence, and explored various leads, but despite their efforts and a growing list of potential suspects, no one could be definitively linked to the crime. As time passed, the case grew cold. DNA testing in 2010 revived interest in the investigation, but failed to provide any substantial breakthroughs. In 2023, 36 years after Donna's slaying, detectives Joey Landgraf and Tim Nice reopened the case, utilizing new forensic techniques. They sent crime scene evidence to Othram, where forensic-grade genome sequencing was used to build a comprehensive DNA profile of an unknown male suspect. This profile was then analyzed by the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team, leading to the identification of Michael Ruff Wigley as a person of interest. Detectives discovered that Wigley had a troubling history, including 2 separate incidents of assault in Central Texas in the early 1980s. He had been charged and convicted in one of those cases, serving time in prison. After his release, Wigley's life was cut short in a traffic accident in 1989. Despite his passing, detectives pursued his connection to the case, ultimately obtaining a search warrant for his exhumation to collect DNA for testing. Wigley's DNA was positively matched to the evidence collected from Donna's crime scene, confirming him as the prime suspect in her case. Interviews with witnesses and family members corroborated Wigley's presence in Carlsbad around the time of the crime. Following the identification of Wigley as the perpetrator, Carlsbad Mayor Dale Janway and the community expressed gratitude to the detectives for their tireless work in solving the cold case. While Wigley could never be charged and found guilty under the court of law, the resolution brought a sense of closure to Donna's family. On a cold February morning in 1987, a young man's lifeless body was discovered inside the Red Cross shelter on West Court Street in Ithaca, New York. David Malcom, a compassionate 26-year-old dedicated to helping others, had become a tragic casualty of violence. As police began their investigation, they found themselves unraveling a dark web that would remain unsolved for decades. The investigation initially led detectives down the wrong path, but as forensic technology advanced and new evidence came to light, the truth began to emerge. 26-year-old David Malcom worked at the Red Cross shelter on West Court Street, where he devoted his days to helping those in need, offering shelter, support, and hope to individuals facing life's hardships. But on February 12, 1987, horror struck the community of Ithaca when authorities discovered David's body inside the shelter. The scene was heart-wrenching. His life had been violently taken in a place meant to provide safety and refuge. In the wake of David's slaying, the Ithaca Police Department launched an exhaustive investigation. Initially, detectives focused their attention on a male associate of David, but as leads dwindled, the case went cold. Over the years, sporadic inquiries were made, but the investigation largely stalled until a renewed push began in 2015. Law enforcement agencies, including the New York State Police Troop C Major Crimes Unit and the Forensic Identification Unit, joined forces to re-examine the evidence with modern forensic techniques. Even with the challenges posed by the passage of time, the commitment to finding answers remained strong, and investigators were determined to find answers. Years of tireless work culminated in a significant breakthrough in 2023, when, with the use of DNA technology, investigators connected the crime to the estranged boyfriend of a teenage girl who had sought refuge at the shelter just prior to David's demise. It became evident that the tragedy stemmed from David's refusal to disclose the girl's whereabouts to her abuser, a choice that ultimately cost him his life. The perpetrator has not been named, but it is known that they passed away in 2019. The identification of David Malcom's perpetrator brought much-needed closure to his family and friends. It highlighted his heroism, showing how he bravely sacrificed his life to protect a young girl from abuse. David's legacy as a kind and selfless person will always be remembered, reminding the community of the light he brought to their lives and the deep loss felt by all who loved him.